In this episode, we're going to look at energy transfers. So there's a principle you need to know about called the conservation of energy. And it says that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be transferred from one store of energy into another. So energy can be transferred by a few different mechanisms. So one of them is mechanical work. And energy transferred from one object to another by a force is an example of mechanical work. So if an object's falling from a building, the weight does the mechanical work. So to transfer energy from gravitational potential energy to a kinetic store. And another example would be if you push a wheelchair, the energy is transferred to kinetic energy to the kinetic store of the wheelchair. So you can also think of electric work. So an electrical current transfers energy from one object to another, such as a battery powering a torch, so to a light bulb in this case. And also you can think of it in terms of waves. So light and other types of wave can transfer energy from one object to another. So heating an object also transfers energy to its internal store. And if you remember from an earlier podcast episode, the internal store is the sum of the energy in the kinetic and chemical stores of its particles. So which principle tells us that the energy cannot be created or destroyed? Now remember, that's the conservation of energy. And some examples of conservation of energy. So reminder, it means that energy is never created or destroyed. It's only converted from one store to another. So for example, an object that's accelerated by a constant force. So the work is done by a force on an object, and the work is converted to the object's kinetic energy. We can also think of a vehicle slowing down. So to begin with, the vehicle's energy is kinetic, and then when the car brakes, the brakes do the work in slowing down that car. And during that process, energy is lost by being transferred to heat and sound energy. So if an object is initially is projected upwards, so thrown upwards, okay, the energy initially is in the kinetic store as it moves upwards, and the object's energy is slowly transferred from kinetic energy to the gravitational potential store as it slows down. So as you throw it up, eventually it will get slower and slower until it stops going up anymore. And that's when all of the kinetic energy has been transferred into the gravitational potential store. So then once the object falls again, the energy transfers from gravitational potential store back into the kinetic store. So if a moving object hits an obstacle, what happens is the object's energy is in the kinetic store to start with because it's moving, and when the object collides with the obstacle, energy is converted to different stores. So for example, the kinetic energy might be transferred to become kinetic energy of the obstacle, which will make that obstacle move. But it could also maybe be thermal energy of the object and the obstacle. If there's a collision, it might make the particles vibrate or oscillate, so that will create thermal energy. And some energy may also transfer into some other types of energy. So another example is bringing water to the boil in an electric kettle. So energy is transferred from the electric store to the mains power supply, and then the thermal store of the water. So just to recap that, if a vehicle is slowing down, it has the kinetic store to begin with, and then when it gets transferred to the thermal store and possibly given off as sound energy when the vehicle brakes, and we say that the brakes have done work on the car. So energy is never created or destroyed, only converted from one form to the other. So if the brakes on a car do the work to slow it down, the energy is lost from the kinetic store and it's transferred into thermal energy. Now remember some of the methods of energy transfer. So we can do electrical work, we can have waves, we can have heat, and we can have mechanical work. Energy transferred from one object to another by a force is an example of mechanical work. Now remember, this law called the conservation of energy says that energy is never created or destroyed. It's only converted from one form into another. So throwing an object in the air, energy is transferred from the object's kinetic store, to the object's kinetic store, and that energy is then slowly transferred to gravitational potential and then back to kinetic as it falls back down. So, some examples of a conservation of energy again. If you have a kettle, energy is transferred from the electrical store of the plug and it's created into thermal store of the water in the kettle.